everyone. Welcome to another episode of Creative Secrets. This is James Hudnall, and here I'm going to talk about foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a literary technique that is very powerful and effective if used properly. It basically allows you to show in advance clues that will tell the reader or the audience that things are about to happen related to a certain subject, but you can be as vague as possible. It won't be till later that they'll notice, oh, I see what you did there. But up until that point, they don't know why it's there. It might set a reaction in their mind or a premonition. It's a way of building tension, a way of creating anticipation. It's a very effective technique if used properly. So we'll get into some examples, but that's the basic structure of what foreshadowing is. It's telling the audience a premonition or foretelling of things to come, but it's not obvious, it's subtle. It's done in a way that you will feel it more than know it, if you know what I mean. One of the first techniques of foreshadowing that you can use is visual foreshadowing, and that is you foreshadow by showing something in a scene, but not in a necessarily obvious way. For example, you can have somebody open a drawer looking for something innocuous, but there's a gun in the drawer. The gun is a foreshadowing of something that's going to be used later in the story. If you remember Chekhov's rule, if you show a gun in the first act, you have to use it by the third act, because it's such a powerful statement and tool that can be used for such powerful means, such as killing someone or threatening someone. So if you have something like that in your story, it can be used to an advantage. Visual foreshadowing can also be something as simple as graffiti on a wall, or it could be the photograph of somebody or something that will later be used in the story. So you could have a character reading a newspaper and seeing a story about somebody, and then later they meet that person and it's relevant to the story. There's all kinds of ways you can do a visual foreshadowing, and it can be a very effective tool, and it's probably the more common usage of the foreshadowing technique. The next kind is less common, but it's also useful, and that is the audio foreshadowing. Audio foreshadowing is when you use a sound or a type of music to indicate something that's going to happen. And what you do is you cue the reader or the audience with it. Now, of course, this is difficult to do in prose or comics. It only mainly works in film, but it's a technique that can be very effective in providing a sense of foreboding or a sense of something about to happen by using musical cues or using sounds that are rare. For example, if you remember the show Lost, if you ever watched that show, they had this smoke monster character, and whenever the monster was going to appear, you would hear its roar. And for a long time in the series, you didn't even know what it looked like. You just knew that roar, and it sounded like some giant monster was coming, and you knew that it was dangerous. There was something similar in the Prisoner TV show back in the 60s, where they had this giant, like, blob-like thing that was like a giant balloon or something that would chase the hero around, and it had its own unique sound. So you can use sound as an effective foreshadowing technique. Of course, you can also use music, so you can have musical cues. So whenever a certain song plays, all you need is a few bars of that song, and if you prime the audience with that music so that whenever they hear it, they know this is an indication that something's going to happen, then you can use an audio cue. An example of this would be the James Bond theme, for example. Whenever you hear the James Bond theme, that's when James Bond usually goes into some kind of action. But you can also use music that's indicative of a emotional tie. So you can use music to tie in a sad event or a good event, depending on how you wanted to use it. There's many ways you can employ the musical or audio foreshadowing technique. Something you might want to play with if you do any kind of video or movie type presentation. The third kind is symbolic. A symbolic foreshadowing is a symbol or something that's related to visual, but it's more like something that's more obscure, something that symbolic, meaning that it's a symbol of something that doesn't mean anything until we figure out what it means later. It can be something as strange as a weird scrawl or a design or a pattern or something that just suggests graffiti or something unrelated to the story, but somehow you feel that it must be related because it's shoved in your face in such a way that you know that the author is trying to show you something that's important. So in a prose situation, you would be describing a symbol and you would describe the aspect of the symbol. In a comic, you would visually show it. And then in a film, the same. So it's an effective technique also. There's a certain comic artist that was very big on symbolism in his work. And this is Osamu Tezuka, who was a famous manga artist in Japan. He would often use certain symbols that were unique to him, that were more like visual cues telling you that this is something to look out for. One of them was a weird kind of pig symbol that was sort of a unhappy pig head, not a severed pig head, just a symbol of a pig head, like a cartoon. And whenever you saw that symbol, you know something bad was going on, or there's something bad related to this. He would also use a symbol of a lit candle floating over somebody's head as an indication of something. Now, it seems kind of strange, but it worked very well for him. You can do things like that if you want to. There's a lot of ways you can use symbolism, and it's a more subtle effect, and it's much more, I'd say, clever, but you don't want to be too clever. But it can be very effective in that when you realize what the symbol means, if it pays off, it can be very effective and powerful. And finally, there is the scenic foreshadowing. A scenic foreshadowing is when you show a scene that is unrelated to anything as far as you can tell, but it's actually showing you something that happened in the past that relates to the future events in the story. And you may not know that until later in the story. But it might be a scene of characters or sub-characters or characters you haven't seen yet doing something or engaging in some activity that is relevant to the story. It's just not relevant yet. So it's foreshadowing events to come. And there may be something that happens in this scene that's sort of ominous or suggests that something important is going to happen related to this scene. This has been used a lot in films, and it can be also used in other media without any trouble. You just have to make sure that it's not a wasted scene, that it's a scene that has weight, even though that may not be obvious until later. Sometimes these kind of scenes usually seem random or unrelated to anything. They might contain characters you haven't seen yet, so you may think, what does this have to do with anything? So you have to be careful there that the audience doesn't feel bored or wonder what this is all about, or that it's confusing. You don't want that. So this is something you can use, but you have to use it carefully and you have to use it with effect. And that's it for this episode. I hope that you got all the information needed for foreshadowing. It's a very useful technique. Please check the links below if you haven't done so. Please like this video. It helps me a lot. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. And I will see you next time. Thank you very much.